Okay,
Right.
the tradition has it, that after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed,
Nice to meet you.
the Chazal came into being, Anshe Knesset Agdola, developed, and we have what was called the whole halachic system. And what's come down as the basic point by the Rambam especially is that after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the din is Tefillah Bimkom Korban. Now, I want to explain what I think the Rambam was talking about. In addition to saying Tefillah Bimkom Korban, he made a perush on the point that the korbanot was a concession to Klal Yisrael at the time. Everybody had temples, and everybody had sacrifices, and so it was like Shmuel when he says, you want a kingdom, you want to be like every other nation, you're going to have bureaucracy and all the tsuris of government and all the rest, and you're going to have a Beit HaMikdash that is going to be cultic.
We're going to be what?
Cultic.
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 So the Chazal say that by Shlishi will come down from the heaven. So that's one point. We have to understand what are we talking about, how does this all fit together. So the thing is, everybody goes according to the Rambam. Tefillah Bimkom Korban. But the Rambam, as you know, is a very, very tricky writer. You have to be very careful to make conclusions about the Rambam because you have to read in between the lines. And there's an in-between-the-line reading of this whole idea of Tefillah Bimkom Korban. The basic point is that when Rambam says Tefillah, he means Bakasha, Hodah, and
Hallel.
Hallel. In other words, the Rambam, we read it and we take it, well, it's Bakasha. Because for us, we're saying, asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu and forgiveness and all the rest of the things. We put a primacy on Bakasha. But for Halacha man, like the Rambam, for sure, he meant to include in Tefillah all three, especially the last two, and not Bakasha. We'll come back to that. Okay, so what's this all about? Tefillah Bimkom Korban. The implication should be, especially with the Rambam shot, that it was a concession to the time. We don't live in a time of temples. We don't live in a time of korbanot. Therefore, if Tefillah Bimkom Korban, why does everybody include by Shlishi in the halachic systematic, including the Rambam? Everybody talks about by Shlishi. But if the premise is what we started with, it makes no sense. Okay, so the first point to understand is what is korbanot and what is the korbanot system? If we go back to, or let's take an anthropological entry into the Chumash text, go back into 1500 BC, go back further, there was 8,000 years of Canaanite history before we came on the scene. 8,000 years. 8,000 years. As a matter of fact, as you start to do the material and you examine the mitzvot system and so forth, you'll see that 85% is taken from Canaan. That was the ingrained culture with Mitzrayim. You had the two basic, and then Babylonia. But the basic point over here was that the impact on the Hebrews, and eventually come down to Moshe Rabbeinu, was coming from Canaan. Okay, so the first point is to understand what is the Korban system. So when I went to school, we were taught, well, everybody had gods because men couldn't control the universe. All things happened, all bad things, this and that. And so man, anthropology, the thing was, civilization started with gods. And then there was a movement to monotheism, so forth. The fact is, and that's a myth, that's been exploded by all the anthropology people. The emergence of God in a culture comes late, comes very late, after there's governmental structure, usually from a king, and so it comes late. It doesn't start like that. It starts with what Chaim Meir talks about practical things that work. And for the Chumash world, or for the world of pre-Moshe Rabbeinu, world of Canaan, there was what I'm calling life health techniques. The korbanot system was a life health technique. Never mind the text, don't look at the text for the moment, the Chumashins, and where do we get it? The basic point is this, like everything else, was a life health technique, a life health technology. And what was the technology? So it was the idea of shogeg. The paradigm case for korbanot is shogeg, unintentional acts that are exonerated by morality and the law. But, as you know, and as every TV program knows, when they talk about family dynamics, what happens? Well, the guy's innocent by the law. The guy is innocent by morality. But he feels guilt. He didn't do enough for his parents. He didn't this and that and so on and so on. Well, wait a minute. What do we do with that? We say, to hell with it? We say, let that go? The Korban system says, I'm going to give you a set of techniques to undo the guilt and the kinds of feelings of depression and so forth, which block, in my language, block life energy in the human being. So they are blocks, clogs, and it blocks the creative use of the energy. So this was what Korban was all about. Korban means Kedusha. Kedusha means life energy. Nothing to do with holiness. That's already a later veneer on the whole story. When the prophet monarchy came in, which is 800 BCE, and we're talking now Moshe Rabbeinu 1300, that's 500 years, but we're talking even before Moshe Rabbeinu. When the prophets came in, they theologized the system, and God was the center feature, and instead of Chaim being directly dealt with on the practical level, it was mediated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, Chaim became the key property of God, of Hashem. Whereas before that time, in the early days, Chaim was the basic orientation to life. And I translated life energy, you can understand why later, but the point is, Chaim was dealt with directly with no intermediary of a theological nature. That's been shown in a number of books, and I built it from this guy Pedersen, even the non-Jewish guy.
Who?
Pedersen, the guy who wrote the book,
from
Israel's Life and Culture. Right. It's online, it's a must reading for everybody. But anyway, it's a must reading because it's an anthropological entry into the text. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that there were vestiges left over, even though the text was redacted a few times, there were vestiges left over in the Chumash text from a life energy orientation to life without Hashem in the picture. God is not the fundamental story. In the early 3 years ago when I wrote that first book, which you'll see eventually, I didn't put it on the market, it was that Torah is about man in the language of God, not about God in the language of man. And so I called it Moses non-theism, and I kept it off the market, but eventually it'll come back, it'll come in, and people will understand what we're talking about. Okay, so come back to Korban. Korban is a life energy technique, especially to solve the problem of shogeg, of unintentionality, but the guilt remains, the uneasiness remains. So Korban was to take away, undo the uneasiness by restoring lost and weakened life energy and, if possible, enhancing it. B'derech Agav, in the first discussion of the holidays, the Moadim, in the Chumash, there's no kapara. If you look at the text, you'll see there's no kapara. Kapara means the restoration of lost or weakened life energy. But in the first round of the Moadim, of the holidays, there's the korban, but there's no kapara. My pshat is, in the second round, when it gives you the holidays, it includes kapara. My speculative pshat is that the Egel HaZahav was such a stain on Klal Yisrael that it could never be undone to a level of completeness where all of this energy is flowing forth. There's a piece of energy for Klal Yisrael that's sitting there and blocked by the big Avera of Egel HaZahav. And so over there we're talking about kapara, lost life energy. We have two types of korbanot. We have korban to restore lost or weakened life energy, and we have korbanot to enhance life energy. The holidays, all the holidays are in the second category. You didn't lose. You didn't lose anything, right? You didn't lose anything, so there's nothing to restore. But there is the set of techniques operative to increase the quality and quantity of the life energy. Now, I use the term life energy. Brennan, who's one of the big healing people, uses the word life energy. Other people in the healing dimension of things use the same word. They use other words of clairvoyance, different kinds of words, but there are people who use the same word, life energy. She uses it in a way because she's Barbara, you know. She uses it because she's concerned, in her first book, she's concerned with the manual of how to heal. And so she's concerned with that, and so she doesn't need anything more. Just say that, that's call it. I'm interested in science. I'm interested in the liphonic physics, namely a scientific understanding of the human life system. So for me, life energy is a potential scientific term, but as yet there's no definition. As yet we don't have the science. That's where we are in the West. We're trying now to see if we can duplicate what we achieved in contemporary physics, starting with Newton and then through Einstein and Planck and so forth, to see if we can continue with the strength of that to get a life system that's scientific. That is not a pseudo question for me. Some people, like Eddington and others, said it's conceptually impossible. I don't buy that. To me, it's not impossible. It doesn't mean that there will be a completeness, but it's not impossible. There's a range where we can work at changing or examining the basic assumptions of contemporary physics, contemporary brain research, and so forth, and see whether or not some of them are an overkill. They're taken as givens, but they're not quite given because there are other cultures and other orientation where they don't have these things. For example, depth perception. Somebody has vision like me in one eye only, I don't have any depth perception. Well, that's not true, because I went to get glasses. The guy says, look, he says, you got depth, but you don't have any depth perception. You only have one eye, so how are you going to do this? There's a scar tissue on the retina, so you can't box out the images, and the inputs are coming in. There's a peripheral vision on both sides, but very minimal. Okay, if you can get glasses that brings those into the center, okay. There's no depth perception. Now imagine a culture where by hook or by crook, by one reason or another, a plague, something happened for births in a genetic orientation, where there was a significant number of people in a culture, especially in the ancient world, before the kingship and so on, that all of whom were vision in one eye. So they have no depth perception. Now, it happens to be that the brain compensates for that and relates and gives it and orients the seeing eye to capture much more of the surrounding environment. And from that surrounding environment and the one vision and the no vision of the depth perception, it gives you something that we can call depth perception. I don't have any problem. Now I ask, as a scientific mind, I ask, how do I know that my depth perception is not yours? I mean, I don't have the answer.
Why does it matter?
Well, no. From the theoretical point of view, it matters. I want to know what's going on, what's happening. From the practical point of view, it doesn't matter. It's getting depth perception. I'm only saying you're getting it through a compensation by the brain, and so you have. But imagine now a culture, a society that had all of these people, and indeed there was no depth perception. There was no brain. There was something wrong with the brain. It operated. Well, then we have a culture where we can't take the notion of body, of three-dimensionality. We can't take that as perception. You don't perceive a body. You don't perceive the body. You can construct the body. And we make a construction. We have geometry, you make a construction, and we then say body is a presumption. And then we get matter changed to energy and so on. But matter, about body, three-dimensionality, and so on, is a construction, is a concept. You don't perceive a body. You perceive something else. You perceive a shape with color, a shape with thickness. And indeed, you can have in early Hebrew society, you can have focus on different things that for us are absurd. In time, for example, there are cultures that have no past and no future in the language, because they don't conceive time on a line. And we ask, how much time did it take to read the book? How much time did it take to do this? How much time? We focus on important. How old are you? I just had my birthday. How old are you? How old are you? We're concerned with the quantity dimension of the time. And in the Chumash, there are a number of instances where we're talking about the number represents the quality of the time, not the amount. Not the amount of time. So, and you have vestiges of this in the Chumash text, where you think, or we think, we're talking about quantity, and we're talking about a quantitative language to express quality time of the thing. So you say, we have the drasha about Esther, right? 127, she was at 127, 120, like Sarah. A 7-year-old, right?
Sarah.
Like Sarah.
You have
right. But it's brought down. Yeah, but it's brought down in relation to Esther. Right. The same drash. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Those are qualitative characteristics. They're not. It's not a number. I talked about it in the last talk when I talked about basar echad, of what that means, and so it's not doesn't necessarily mean quantity. It could be indeed, like we say, miyuchad. There's no word miyuchad in the Chumash, but the word echad in certain contexts carries the meaning special, unique, one in the sense of a quality, not in the sense of a quantity. Now just think. So let's say we have a culture, and they don't perceive. They look at the cup, they look at the table, and they don't perceive a body. They perceive a shape. And it doesn't enter consciousness. Now we say that's crazy as hell. We can't imagine what that means. But there are cultures, and Hebrew culture is one of them, where there are certain things that we take as givens, which they don't take as givens, not as a perceptual given. There are perceptual givens, and then there are conceptual givens. Indeed, there's a given by performative, which is not for tonight, but you can say, Hare zeh, so-and-so, and then that's a given. It functions as a given. A given means in a system, a given means you do not require any justification of the given. All you have to do is use it and see what it produces, how it relates to the rest of your material, whether it's a scientific or a common sense or whatever. So you can make a performative, and it's neither true nor false. It's either efficacious or not efficacious. It's nothing to do with truth or falsity. But it does function as a given, and in history of Western science and Western philosophy and Western metaphysics, I saw very clearly from Heidegger, who was the big metaphysician for the contemporary period, that when he discusses the history of metaphysics, which he eventually throws out, he shows the careful history of metaphysics yields the result that there's no metaphysics anymore. And he wrote a book called The End of Philosophy and so forth. But the basic point is, he doesn't use my language. He doesn't use language, you don't find the word performative in Being and Time. But he uses words that are performatives. To posit, to declare. What's to declare? To declare, it says, I declare. And I give what I declare. To posit an axiom set is to say, hare ze axiom 1, 2, 3 in the Euclidean geometry. Okay, so now you don't justify an axiom. You use the axiom for proofs, but you don't justify them. That's what it means of a given. You can have two types of givens, one type of given, and a third, which we come to, but one is by perception, one is by performative. The other, much more complex and subtle, is by concept. Now, I'm not going to talk about that tonight because that's a separate topic of how to understand the mind. My view has been, and why I got stuck, I asked the question, I'm not the only nut. I'm not the only one working on an idea that there can be a science of the life system. Especially since after the war. Before the World War II, the United States, I remember horse and buggies, they used to mess up the street, we couldn't play ball. But from that time, after the war, when the United States emerged as a country, I mean, so many people worked on the problem. Now especially, what's blocking everything? Well, one of the things I discovered was we're starting with some assumptions of givens that are not mukhrach. They're not necessary. And they lead you into a block of developing a life system. We look at a life system, and we come back to Corbin, we look at a life system in terms of a body with organic quality, as an organism. An organism presupposes body. So that means we have to get a life system that operates with that assumption. Maybe that assumption is wrong. Maybe that assumption is wrong. And we don't start with body, and we don't start with organism. That when the pre-Hebrew culture in Canaan and so on dealt with animals, they didn't classify them as bodies with motion, with growth, like a plant, with locomotion. In the Greeks, there were 4 types of motion, with locomotion and plant, stages of growth and so on. And so this was the classification, but it all presupposed body. When you work out and the implications of that, you find out that the whole idea of organism and its properties in the cell and DNA system and so on, genetic system, are not rich enough to get a life system. We are bogged down because we're starting with assumptions that are givens and are so unbelievably true that we can't even imagine anything denying them. So even Pedersen, in his book, why do I keep referring it? It's online, you can read it for yourself. It's online. He says in many places, they didn't think the way we think. They don't have logic. What? What does that mean? They don't have logic. They argued by association packages. And when they associated in a certain way, and they connected, this was the argument. They didn't have assertion.
What are we talking? We're talking about Talmudic period? What period?
No, early. Oh, Talmudic is late. Talmudic is late. We're talking about the Moshe Rabbeinu vestiges left in the text and before Moshe Rabbeinu. So when they looked at animals, to come back to our topic tonight, which is sacrifices, when they look at animals, they're not looking at the point that we talk about. That there's animals and then there's human being. Human being is a human animal. Even in Western civilization, the human being is an animal with some special properties of rationality and so forth. The human being, for Joe Levinson, is not an animal in any respect. I heard a program the other night about the sucking mechanism of a woman for the breast. And in Western civilization, one of the guys made the point that that's nothing to do with procreation. That has to do with nursing the child. And so it took on a special meaning in the Western civilization where it carries the negative part of sex, to speak loosely. I was going to ask you about the Orient.
What?
I was going to ask you about the Orient. Some other time we'll talk about that. But the basic point was that somebody would even talk that way and say that reminds us that we're animals. Right on the TV. Oh, now for me. And not for the Moshe Rabbeinu system and so forth. The human being is a human being through and through with every single property. It's not that the human being is animal because it nurses the child and by the infant, and when you look at the material, you see similarities. Mm-hmm. We see similarities because we didn't look for the differences. If we will start to look for the differences, we will see a woman nursing an infant is not a monkey nursing an infant or a chimp or anything else like that.
Wait a minute. We have a problem here. If we look at the neshama system, you see that chaya is broader than neshama. Chaya
Good.
is broader
Okay.
than neshama.
Meaning?
There's a problem here.
Yeah, what's the problem?
The problem is the chaya is broader than neshama.
Yeah, but what's the problem? The problem is we're going to try to get a science of Chaim. So I say all we got with all this research
It's not the same chaya. You're saying it's not the same chaya.
That's right, it's not the same. And what we got was psychophysiological parallelism. I'm reading Barbara Brennan now, her other book now, right in the middle of the stuff. It's right there. That's all she could do. She could relate auras and chakra materials to, this is coming from the outside of the body outward, and she tells you how far they extend and so on, so on, so on. And then she correlates that with bodily things that are going on. And so she has what was called psychophysiological parallelism. She's got correlations.
Maps.
She's got correlations, mapping, but no, that's not science. That could be a dimension inside of science, but that itself, a correlation, is not science. If we take even causality, I can correlate anything. When I used to go to shul in Kiryat Moshe, so it always got me because I always sat in the back or stood in the back, like I said, fast escape. But in any event, every time I walked into the shul, there was a guy 6'3" in that corner, me in this corner, another guy 6'3" in that corner, and another guy 6'3" in this corner. Well, it just hit me all the time. That was a pattern in this shul. It just happened that when you walk in, it took on. So you can make a class of anything. A guy sitting in the corner over 6'3". You can correlate anything by making classes and making correlations. But correlations do not give you science. Correlations tell you, like in shooting crap and so on, and dice and so on, that if there are correlations, well, if it comes up 2 or 1 or whatever, or 7 most of the time, and statistically you're supposed to come up much, much less and so on, well, then you could say, well, maybe we'll complain to the management, maybe there's something going on we didn't catch, but correlation, you can't get reality from correlations. You can't get scientific laws from correlations. Okay, but they tell you that maybe we should re-examine the argumentation. Okay, so what was Korban? Korban was a life health technique that related to the one who brought the Korban and included the Kohen. I want to stop 2 minutes for discussion, and then I want to take the opportunity today not to talk, and like I always go off on tangents and everything else. I want to give you a scenario of how it worked. In the early book, I presented another one, because I keep on talking like that, and if you don't give anything to the reader, well, then the guy says, look, you got a double zero. You're in the realm of speculation about a life system, a life science. And now you come talk about korbanot, you're giving this whole picture of a life, so give an example. So I said, look, I'm going to give a couple of examples of how it works, and let the reader come out of the woodwork who knows more than me and build and correct the mistakes and the overkill. I call it a package of intuitions. My intuitions include that. They could be very, very right or very, very wrong. But at this particular moment in time, they are powerful enough for me to write them down and put them on the thing, even though people will say you are crazy, 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 crazy. And indeed, the last subsidiary point, before we get to these things, is many years ago, 15 years, I always felt that the ether, which was thrown out of physics after Michelson-Morley experiment, that there was something missing there. We threw out too much. And I spent 2 years in the library, in the physics library, reading in papers and this and that, and from the science point of view, popular point of view. I came up empty-handed. I couldn't do anything. In the last 4 weeks, given this crazy method that I have now, of when I'm reading something or writing something, whatever comes into my mind at the moment, I stop and I write. The word Mobius strip came into my mind, wrote about Mobius strip. The word ether came into my mind, wrote about it. And then when I told it to one of my students there, who just finished his doctorate at Hebrew University, he said, Charles Sanders Peirce, the greatest American philosopher, left 80,000 pages in manuscript, used the method for 45 years. So much so that he has the microfilm of all of Peirce's writing. And in the microfilm, you see he was already old and his handwriting is weak. And the editors in Indiana University is putting out now the Peirce papers. 80,000, going to take a long time. Harvard event.
Who's Peirce?
Charles Sanders Peirce was the greatest American philosopher. But in any event, Harvard put out 6 volumes of his papers and stuff like that. But there was so much more to put out. But what did he say? So the point was that the editors did not include in the re-editing of them, republishing the material, the shtuyot that he wrote by association. It just came into his head, he just wrote. Now I wrote things, you can say you are crazy. But right now, I'm not crazy. Because when I read over the thing, what I wrote, it's not stupid. It's not gibberish. It's not, Lewis Carroll kind of language. It's sentences, it's structure, and so on. And I started with a different assumption. A regular achat, the ether was misconceived. It was taken to be either a gas or some kind of a body. Right, some kind of a body. That's wrong. It's not a body. What? Well, if you knock out the word body, you just thrown away all of physics and everything else, because we start with the notion of body. So I said it wasn't body. Whatever it was, X, it was something else. So, of course, they threw it out because if it was body, it had to have effects on their experiment. It had no effects, therefore it can't exist. That's the argument. If you have something in the domain of causality, and it's supposed to have an effect on something, and it doesn't have the effect, well, the natural conclusion is it doesn't exist. The argument is as simple as that.
Matrix.
It was study, it was
They didn't exactly
take for granted a different set of assumptions.
They didn't really say it didn't exist. They came to the conclusion we don't need
That's
it.
here you may have.
Yeah, they don't need it. Right, right,
They
right.
said we don't need
We
it.
don't need it. Right. Anyway, this is the story. So what's the story
So
here
we're gonna
about
have
Korban?
2 minutes.
What's the story about
Joe?
Korban?
So we have 2 minutes of discussion.
Yeah, and then we're going to go to, I want you to read over what I wrote. We'll read it together. I wrote one page as a, take one of these sheets, and you'll see,
Joe, I want to say something.
it's going to be right up your alley.
I want to say something about the minor
Yeah.
point. Is that okay?
Whatever you like.
I happen to have a lazy eye. I look with one eye. I still see depth. I found out how it works. If I do this, I look at you like this,
Yeah.
I can't see, it all looks flat. As soon as I remove my hand, my
Yeah.
eye very quickly goes over the ceiling, and that's the way I know how far
That's
away you
the-
are.
That's the compensation.
It's a compensation from one eye.
That's the compensation.
When you said if everybody has one eye, then they won't know depth. That's not exactly true because you can see absolute one eye. Also, this is also depth.
Oh, yeah,
You know, you
of
don't have to
course,
look
of
at it.
course, of course.
So there is different. It's a minor point.
No,
but,
it's part of the whole picture.
I know you wanted to say something
It's
general.
part of the whole
Can I just
picture.
tell you this? When we see the illusion of depth in a painting, or for example, I look and I assume that that corner of the room is at a certain distance from me, or the painting, we'll have an
Right.
illusion of depth. If we didn't have depth, would we see everything as just
Well, look at
Surfaces?
Egyptian painting. That's one of
Okay.
the points that I made.
Egyptian painting?
That we don't see surfaces in geometry.
Yeah.
We see lines. We construct three-dimensionality, but a plane does not presuppose body and geometry. That's all. This has started. This whole 4 weeks of writing, with this crazy method, has started from Basar Echad in the Chumash. Basar Echad. What does that mean? You'll leave your mother and father, and you'll be Basar Echad. What does that mean? So, to give it over very quickly in 1 minute, it was shown by the Olave, the guy who works on the Egyptian basis of biblical Hebrew, that the word basar means shape. The word basar means shape. Shape, shape, shape. It does not mean flesh. When it's translated in other contexts as meat, my suggestion is it's translated as meat because you buy meat by the shape. Lamb chop, a steak, whatever it happens to be. Right or wrong, I don't know, but that's the point. I found also when I was doing the Google thing, I found things that in Turkish, basar is a male proper noun, a name of a male that is a handsome getter.
Like Bashir.
So it has a strict positive meaning. So I took off from trying to understand. Everybody says it's a metaphor. Well, first of all, why should there be a metaphor? Say the thing straight. There's an Ezer Kenegdo, which includes the man-woman relation and so forth. And then the first one, and then it comes Basar Echad. What does that mean? What does that mean? Basar Echad. So it was translated flesh by St. Jerome into Latin, church father in 340 or whatever Christian era. And there are 150 references to basar as flesh in the New Testament. What has come down, like in my talk last week, I said there's Jerome Avenue in the Bronx. It's not named after him. I thought it was. It's named after some woman who was a part of her husband was part of the city council and so on. But he didn't deserve a street. He deserved a supermarket. He deserved a whole shopping center. Why? The impact of one word in his translation has been a subject of Western civilization for 2,500 years. Everybody translated it flesh in a derogatory sense. When the music of the pasuk, the music of the phrase is not derogatory, it's a coming together, a unification. So they say, well, it's a metaphor. The Rav is a metaphor. First of all, why does the text want to give a metaphor when it can say something straight? And what's it a metaphor? For sexual intimacy. Good. How does that fit what it says? It says, basar echad. What does that mean? So I concluded what it means is shape. Like when a child draws on a paper an outline, right? That's a shape. One dimension. Now you say, well, the
Two
paper.
dimensions.
Well, okay, but I mean, there's nothing about the shape. But the point is, we say, well, wait a minute, the paper is not a line. When you see a line, see, when Barbara Brennan talks about chakras, talks about auras, and talks about a line, she uses the word line. But when she's talking about something she sees in the body or whatever, an aura or something, or a line of chakra, when she talks about that, she says it has thickness. It's a half inch this way and that way and so on and so on and so on. Now she has to qualify. She has to qualify for the reader who knows where we're coming from geometry, from ordinary language, ordinary world. She better cover her audience. I mean, she's a modern, contemporary person. She works for NASA and so on and so on and so on. So I mean, how could you just let that go by? She has to say something that has thickness. So I postulate a line that has no thickness. Crazy. A line has no thickness. A geometric line. Well, a geometric line has no thickness. But a line, as used in Basar Echad, had a shape without thickness. Now that's crazy. But that was the pshat that I worked out in the text about Basar Echad, what it's talking about. And so what it's telling you is it's like two people not under a cover. It's not the man and the woman connected under a cover, a blanket. That's already in the three-dimensionality plane. It's as if we gave a paper to the child and say, draw two people here, and the line will be connected. When the line is not connected, and we add some Leonardo da Vinci perspective to the painting, to the drawing, then we have front and back and so on and so on. We have the dimensionality. But one can deal with, one can imagine, one can say, like I said, well, they perceived shape, not body. Just like in time, they didn't perceive how much. They didn't perceive it. It wasn't in the repertoire. It didn't register in consciousness. For us, that's crazy. But like Pedersen says in many places when he's describing the difference between the ancient culture of the Hebrews from an anthropological point of view and the later culture of the prophets and later Judaism and so on and so on. So right there he says in a number of places, he says, I don't expect you to understand it because I've got to use words, but I'm talking to a Western person, but he says, look, they don't think the way we talk. What can I tell you? So you have to now struggle. Now, he's not concerned. He's an anthropology person. He's a philological person. He's not concerned with the science of the life system. I'm concerned with science of the life system to examine assumptions that are so obvious that nobody in his right mind would even challenge the assumption. So I'm marking down a package of assumptions, hoping that they will trigger off we'll come one step closer to what I call the sensitization literature about a life science, a science of the life system. We are not in the realm yet of laws, of big discovery. We are in the sensitization literature, getting sensitizing a generation to pull away from certain types of assumptions and entertain other types of assumptions, in the hope that we will move the field, the ideational field, a couple of steps forward, such that there will emerge the Einstein of biology. So I'm saying our going to the Orient is exactly for this. There's no science in the Orient, but there's workables. There's things that work. There's things that seem to have some kind of effects, and so we're trying to read the material, bring it into the Western civilization, being concerned with the formulation or getting closer to a life system. On Mayer's advice, when I mentioned about this crazy method, he says you should reread Barbara Brennan. I took his advice, and it has been a 3-4 week unbelievable experience, staggering. I could talk about Brennan, I could go on for hours and hours without a stop, because it's so clearly what she's doing, where the mistakes are, and so on and so on. She is not a scientific mind. I'm a scientific mind. She studied science, she worked for NASA and so forth, but her mentality, she's concerned with people. She moved into spiritual healing. She talked, a new book is about creativity, healing and creativity. She moved into people. I'm not denying people, but that's not the same as trying to milk materials to catch vestiges that will trigger off, I say, challenging basic assumptions. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to this thing that I gave you.
The Rambam, I heard, says somewhere that people are not animals in body with the human mind. That all of us, all of our being is human. I think that the Rambam
Well,
says
that's
that
good. If he says it, I never came across it, but that's, to me, today it's a given. I thought the guy was very obtuse on the program, Every Tuesday night they have on Channel 8 a sex program, whatever it is, on the history of sex, pornography. And sometimes there are some interesting points. I don't know, Channel 8, I don't know. I sneak it in because when Linda's doing flipping channels, I remember they said Tuesday night, late at night, so you could see what they're talking about. And sometimes they gave some interesting material, like this whole thing about the nursing of the child and so on and so on. But anyway, okay, what I want to do tonight is just to read together this idea, and you will see right off the bat how and in what respects the korban was a healing system. Okay, on the assumption that the Kohen does some talking during the korban process, what does he talk about? First point is, my intuition is, the korban process did not take place in a silence thing. There was, in addition to what was done, of sprinkling the blood, enclosing the space, and so forth, and relating to the animal, transferring the avera, or the guilt, or whatever, to the animal. There was this notion of a transfer, whatever that means. But the basic point was that there was this, it wasn't a silence thing. It included talk. Assumption, intuition. Could be right, could be very wrong. It'd be nice to see in some of the vestiges, in the halakha especially, whether or not this was the case. You would get some glimmer somewhere that what the Kohen did, what exactly he did. And so, okay, I'll leave it open. But on the assumption that there was talk involved, what did he talk about? In short, he talks about forgiveness. That's the paper you've got. He talks about forgiveness of oneself, but not forgiveness of what has happened, because there is nothing to forgive. He was exonerated by the law, He's exonerated by morality. He still has these feelings of guilt and sensitivity, but he's exonerated by the law and by morality. So what's there to forgive? What's there to forgive? Remember, we're not in the prophetic orientation where we beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forgive. We're talking in a straight common sense framework with no theological dimension. So, what does he talk about? And sure, he talks about forgiveness. He talks about forgiveness of himself, but not forgiveness of what has happened, because there is nothing to forgive. By reason of what happened being unintentional, he had been exonerated by morality and the law. So again, the question comes back, what exactly in himself is he forgiving? Surprisingly enough, he's forgiving, read the sentence, it's the sheer fact that he feels guilt that led him to enter the korban process in the first place. He had this guilt from the shogeg, and he felt the need to relate somehow to take on the korban process to relieve this guilt. So it's the sheer fact that he feels guilt that led him to enter the korban process in the first place. Forgiving oneself comes with the realization that there is so much more in living than morality and law. There are one's feelings and how they get expressed in life energy, states, and transformations. The fact that he feels guilt means that he is not his full self. He is not who he is. This is so even though he does not know why he feels guilt. His recognition of this is his forgiveness of himself. In a flash, he remembers the joyous things in his life. He forgives himself for having fallen away from dancing in the wind and singing in the rain. With these feelings, the korban process has ended. And then I put at the end, if this sounds like healing through forgiveness, it is. Because all I did, I'm in the middle of Brennan's book, and I took some of her chapters, and in this particular one, I just took it right out of her book, put it in my own language, and said, right, that's what's going on. In other words, by having the guilt, not knowing what it's coming from, having the guilt is a blockage to his energy flow, to his life energy flow. Now, right on the moment. So there's nothing to forgive, there's nothing to restore from the point of view of something that happened in relation to morality and law. It was a shogeg. But there is something to restore from his behavior. And if we would make a Brennan analysis in aura and chakra terms, we would see that he's failing in certain areas of the body, and so on and so on and so on. And we apply what she's talking about. So the very fact of the forgiveness is what is in the need of recovery, and that is the korban process. Who got it? You once gave me the piece on Rab Nachman. Clear as the whistle. You can't give l'chav zchut. I asked you where it was. You once gave me the reference. You can't give l'chav zchut to somebody else unless you give it to yourself. Big principle in Rab Nachman. You can't relate and give the other person the benefit of the doubt unless you give it yourself. In Torah, we have been avera oriented. We don't recall dancing in the wind and walking in the rain. No, we can overkill on what we did wrong, what we did in averas. That's not our whole self. If we would now recall, Baba Brennan talks about remembering. If we don't remember who we are, then we can't have this energy. And for her, aberrations of this whole picture lead to ill health and disease, and in this article is creativity, and their book is on creativity. So the basic point here is that the korban system is like what we would call going to a healer, going to her in her office and so on, and receiving a set of techniques that are operative on the situation, And the result of which is, if she's successful in 3 or 4 times or whatever she talks about, the result is that the person will free up these blockages and have a higher level of energy flow. That's what's achieved in the material. Now she goes perhaps a little further in terms of what she calls spiritual healing, but hands-on healing, that's what it does. So what is it all about? What's Third Temple? It's not a concession. Beit HaMikdash wasn't a concession for the time. Beit HaMikdash in Third Temple means that there are a set of laws, a set of scientific laws of a life system underneath the carbon, underneath the workability of the carbon, as I just explained, and I was just giving you a description. What will come down from heaven, Chazal say, is Bayit Shlishi. Bayit Shlishi does not mean a bayit. Bayit Shlishi does not mean a building. Bayit Shlishi does not mean if we had a videotape of Bayit Rishon and Bayit Sheni and Bayit Shlishi, we will see the similarity. We don't know how it's going to take form. But that there will be the discovery of the laws is Bayit Shlishi. There will be a liphonic physics and the technology that goes with it. We will look back on this 20th century as one of the darkest
21st.
ages, 21st, whatever, as one of the darkest ages in the history of mankind. Because we will have bypassed. We think we're getting medical technology. You know, I'm pill. You know, I hate pills. So for Shalom Bayit, I take a pill for Parkinson and done. Come off it. But yeah. I asked a few questions to the neurology. I asked this woman from France, says, is it the same for everybody? Suppose because the brain they divide into quarters, and Parkinson deals with the musculature system and stuff. I said, look, it's one brain. I said, well, you know, I asked her, this was about 5 years ago when I was diagnosed for the first time, before the stroke. But the point was, the whole idea was, I asked her from France, I said, you know, I'm not a pill taker and everything, but if you say I should take it, what is it the same for everybody? It slows down. That's what they tell you. It slows down the process of cell deterioration in the brain. Good. Okay. What it is, they don't know. What it is, I don't know. What it affects vitamin D? No, they don't know. Whether it affects vitamin D, you should sit in the sunshine. So I go for a walk and sit in the sunshine. But the point is, well, first they wanted me to take a pill, a vitamin D pill, whatever. But I looked at the thing, Linda bought it, a very expensive pill. I looked at the thing, it said, there's a bad thing by overdose, and there's a bad thing by underdose. Underdose. So I said, the hell with the pill, go for a walk in the sunshine, and in 15 minutes you get vitamin D. The point is, they don't know what's what. They don't know what's what. Anyway, so I say, what's Tisha B'Av all about? Well, Chazal put it in kept it. It kept it alive. The sadness of the day is that there was the destruction of the temple. There was destruction of the temple from the point of view of the loss of political sovereignty. Because already the life energy techniques were lost. Way lost. We're talking about 800 Christian BCE of the king's monarchy period. I say they were even lost for Shlomo HaMelech in the first temple. It became cultic. It had to do with, it was theologized. And with that theologization went the total loss and eclipsing of what I'm talking about, of a technique for healing. So I say there are vestiges left in the Chumash, and if we study and enter the text with the questions, we will find answers. And further, when the prophets critiqued the monarchy, so in many cases, even though they theologized the system, but at the same time when they critiqued what was going on in Shlomo HaMelech, David HaMelech, and the kings and so on, they used or brought back vestiges of the pre-Moshe world. So that it's not just in the Chumash, 5 books, but it's also in the prophetic literature that when read from this angle, we will find other things. To make the story short, I say there's something else, that when Chazal redid the corpus of the material, especially by Ezra, in the corpus of the Gemara, if we will look, we will find the same thing. We didn't enter with the flashlight, so we didn't find anything. If we will study the material from the point of view of healing, of life energy, transformation, and so forth, we will open up a new world. That is the significance and the happiness and the greatness of Tisha B'Av. The sadness is from the past, the happiness is from the future. That it was preserved in bodies of writing, such that Klal Yisrael can now use that and contribute to the advance of a Lafonic physics.
We can have a party, we don't have to fast.
Huh?
You can have a party.
Ain't no Finami.
You have a party or do you fast?
Not fast, but it's only for not getting too crazy outside the system. But the basic point here is that it's a fantastic thing. I left out there's a whole piece here about living in the.
So next year have a party.
About living in the now. You see, there's a whole other piece about the nature of time. That when they don't conceive things from the point of view of linear time. They can conceive things from the now. And in the now is the immediacy of the person. Anyway, this was the basic idea I wanted to get across, was this basic idea of a shift in the orientation. When I lectured in West Orange, I had 200 people, and most of them they went out, they never heard anything like it.
What is West Orange?
In Jersey, in the United States.
When was that?
I don't know, 8, 9 years ago. When I went to lecture,
No, you weren't half as crazy as you are now.
No, that's true. That's very true. But the point was, they paid $1,000, whatever, $1,200 for 3 lectures, whatever it was. But I remember I gave one of them it was Tisha
Is that
B'Av.
before tax or after?
That's right. That's right. But anyway, at least it's food for thought. To look at the picture that way.
I want to suggest something.
Yeah.
What you said about the forgiving of the forgiveness itself and that whole that is in the Bereshit story. If you said reread the text right from the beginning of Bereshit, like you never saw it before. Just read the story about the Chet Adam Arishon and Ayeka and everything. If you read the story like you've never seen it before, there's no indication that Adam made a Chet in the first place.
Oh, I agree.
It says he wasn't supposed to eat of the tree. Mimenu, lo tochal mimenu. It doesn't say you shouldn't eat the fruit. In fact, it says the opposite. It says umikol ha'etz hadan tochal. U'mi'etz hadan, not ach mi'etz hadan lo tochal. It says lo tochal mimenu. And the problem is, well, you have to do it once.
Yeah, no, that's good. Some of these
It's in the text.
Some of
right in
these
the
I
beginning of
picked up.
Bereshit. Everything it says in Bereshit.
Some of these I picked up, and others I learned from reading it again. I mean, like the thing that I picked up about the declaration. I mean, it says Vayomer Elokim. Vayomer doesn't mean say. It's been translated said for 2,000 years.
Okay.
It
But
means
how do you do the
He
later stuff?
declared.
What later stuff?
Declared.
after
Declared is
the
not
Tefillah,
is not
they're-
saying.
That's supposed to.
Saying
That's
is an
after the Tefillah. They're
assertion.
not going on at all.
Making an
They're a
assertion.
product of the Tefillah.
My whole life
After the Tefillah.
went on a certain track because I read the text and it said God said. Well, then it was who is God? What does it mean?
Another
God
punishment?
said.
Yes,
I read the
everything
Rambam.
comes
I
out.
read Mor Nevuchim. I read all these things.
If you look through it,
You know,
if you look through it, it's the Sipur of Bereshit.
I came to Rav Chaim, he says,
much
you're a
easier
great
to see
philosopher, I
the
heard
fact
you
that he was
for the
supposed
great
to
from
eat
you know a
from the
damn
bits,
thing about Torah.
from the
I said, what do you mean? I
tree,
did the
not
Rambam in this,
from
and he
the
says,
Chalva.
you don't know anything about
He
Torah.
said,
It took me 40 years as a
Did I
student
ask for a woman?
to understand what he's
Spoke
talking
up
about,
I
and
should give him
to
a
even
shot.
see
Give him a
that
shot.
he's another one of
He
these
should've
thinkers
just
that you
assumed
have to read
an
between the
architect,
lines.
a Jungian architect. Had he said,
Between the lines, he
"Give me
looks
a-
like he's in
give me a woman,"
metaphysics.
I assume that she's good.
Like
Finished.
Barbara, she says, look,
She
I'm
said,
in
well,
metaphysics,
okay,
here it
people
is.
say,
She's
"Oh,
a
I
healer,
was
she
never
doesn't
told
need,
about
she's
that.
interested in
It's
science.
not in the text at all.
So I'm worried about,
She
I'm
saw it
worried
so
about
she
having
raised it, said
metaphysical
it wasn't
assumptions
allowed
in
to
science,
be
they have to be
doesn't say.
eliminated.
It says 3 times in
But
Bereshit, "Lo
she's
tochal
not worried
mimenu,"
about
from
that.
the S.
Well, I say
How
Reb
many
Chaim
times
also,
did
he
she
wasn't
get
worried
from
about
Chalva?
that.
Not only that,
So
it
if
says
you read him
moksha
one
muktzum,
way,
but there is no
he has a
moksha
metaphysics.
What is that?
muktzum. There's no moksha muktzum.
He has a metaphysics.
But you-
What is
you'll
it?
die if you
Like he
add
says,
something.
Chuke, Samti Chuke Shemayim V'aretz, right?
If you look at who one way.
The
Chaim,
story is missing.
Yeah.
Chaim in the
Adam
text.
Rishon
The
never
Navi
ate
says,
from the
Yeshayahu
tree.
says, Samti
He ate from
Chuke
Chava.
Shemayim
He started
V'aretz.
recognizing that it was
The
a
laws
spirit from Chava.
are themselves a
Responsible in
Metziut,
yourself.
an
You
existence.
know, when I ask for a woman,
That's metaphysics. That's
That's
metaphysics. The laws have
a
a special kind of ruchni existence, okay?
And she said,
That's metaphysics. Barbara says, I'm not going to use the word consciousness or mind, I'm going to use the word essence.
And the only person, the only thing
For
that's
us,
the truth in the story
isness. So she says, look, for my purpose, consciousness says too much. I'm not going to use the word consciousness, and I'm not going to use the word mind, because there's too much history with it and so on, and confusion about what they are and what they aren't, and so on and so on. How can we talk about the mental in the first place? So I'm going to use the word essence. Essence has been the metaphysical word for 2,500 years. Isness, okay, isness.
Men have no sequel, no chance
That-
of
that-
arriving at
So what she
only
called
through
essence,
only through relationship.
Reb Chaim called chukim.
Anything that isn't through zivug is
And from
pointless.
Yeshayahu,
There's no-
something chukei shemayim
Following
v'aretz,
inspiration.
a special
From the beginning.
ruchni existence. That's what he does on the surface.
Haisha tov.
And so everybody takes him to be doing that. I take him that if you read more carefully, he leaves that alone and is concerned really with the assumptions that go under a life system. And he dealt with that in a different way and a matter of speculation. And even when I spoke to him many times, he said he's hung up on the problem of time. And indeed, everybody in the West today who are concerned with the life system is hung up on the problem of time. So what's needed is breaking down, examining and breaking down givens that have been so obvious that we just can't shake them loose. When we shake them loose, we may come up, or at least move one step closer to a life system. I, for one, as everybody knows, I'm big on mathematization. There has to be a mathematization of the system that predicts observables. Science is not observables and measurements. That's why in physics we have theoretical physics, we have experimental physics. In life systems, there ain't no such thing as theoretical biology. There's a guy named Waddington, every 2 years in England, he'd make a conference on the possibility of a theoretical biology. Now what does he mean? He doesn't mean mathematization in the sense of refined measurement and so forth. He means mathematization that started with Newton and continued in Einstein and Planck. The mathematization generates what has to be observed. And if we can't observe it, that doesn't mean it's not there. It means nature is like covering up everything. It generates observables. Mathematization generates observable. Now we ask the question, where is the mathematization? Where is the mathematization? There is none. You read the materials, there is none. Reb Chaim himself thought it was topology. It's not rich enough. And so,
It's not going to get to it because the definition is right in Bereshit. When you talk about Da'at, it says in Bereshit that Da'at is about Adam Yada et Chava. So if you want to understand anything that has to do with Da'at, if it's not understood...
well, that's where I'm going, of course, but the West isn't going there. The West, it said, we're Basar Chad. What does it have to do with all the big stuff we're talking about? You're crazy, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with sexuality, intimacy. That's it. What more is there? Well, when you follow the thing through, that's going to turn out to be the most rich source, the most pregnant, pardon the expression, the most pregnant source of chidushim that will have efficacy for this life system. I see it clearly,
Source
and I wrote
is-
some of the things that have been coming into my head from this crazy method. And you'll look at me and you say you're nuts. So say I'm nuts. Barbara has to defend her reputation. She's a world-renowned, healer. I haven't got a reputation. I don't have to explain anything. I don't have to defend anything. I can write what I want, and so the reader will say, "Oh, the guy is nuts." I always said he was nuts, so he is. That's all.
The mathematization of biology is not so hard.
What? No.
Mathematization of biology.
There's no mathematization of biology.
Yeah.
What are you
Yes.
saying? What? There's no mathematization of biology.
You're getting absurd. It's like,
Anyway, this was the point about
Oh, you
Bayit
didn't get
Shlishi, about Tisha B'Av, that when you look at it from the big picture,
Is this the
it
plus sign
answers
that's in
Yes.
it answers the array
Man,
of questions
woman,
that people
and a child.
ask about Tefillah Bimkom Korban.
why not go
and
all
so
the way?
on.
Why be stuck? If you're saying what you're saying, stop fasting on Tisha B'Av. Make
Well,
a
look,
party. Make a party out of it.
again, when
Why go halfway? I don't understand, Joe. What's this halfway
look,
business?
if I had, like I used to say, if I had a couple of
Just
$1 billion,
clear.
then we're talking turkey.
Wait a minute.
What does that mean? What does that mean for anybody? The establishment has got. Look, here's Cardozo.
But you just said you don't care what. I mean, if you don't care, you
Okay,
don't
I
care.
don't care, but I don't have enough clout to do that.
Why?
I wish I had clout to do that.
Why?
Why?
Yeah, why? Simple question. Why?
I don't know why.
I was a fish, but no one is water.
I don't know why. It takes time for these things. Like
He's
I
not an
always said.
activist.
Like I always
To be an
said.
activist.
No, it's not
Why
activism.
is it to be an activist?
Mayor, you got a good
Because
point.
we
You
make
got
a
a good
statement,
That's a
point.
very
because you
simple
come
question.
off
Why?
like an activist. It's just
Nothing
like,
to do
Who
with
cares?
Owen
Who
Quiet.
cares?
okay, on your own quiet.
No, in writing, I do that. That's not the
Doesn't mean a
point.
party,
But
like,
but
for
it,
everybody.
but
It's
it needs
for everybody.
organization. See, it needs organization. We have the tools for organization. It needs a new way of thinking that can be done and done very fast. But we need the people to get out of the woodwork and start to move. Okay.
So be the person.
I'm doing the best I can in that respect. Sure, I'm doing the best I can. The fact that you can meet and have the synergy of a group and air your ideas and people, you may say something when you go home, but
I'm just being
so you say the guy, you won't hear it anywhere else. Like
I
I
heard
used
there
to
was-
say, the Dalai Amos of Allah is in his house. The Dalai Amos of Ashkaf is in his house. What can I tell you? Nobody. I solved the ether problem by shifting the assumptions and showing there was a different assumption. There was another one they didn't account for, so of course it didn't enter the argument. Well, so the guy can read it. What I'm saying is, the goal is you can't bypass it.
You can't bypass what?
What I'm saying, when I say about the ether, you can't bypass it. You can say you're wrong, and I'll show you you're wrong.
But what's the ether got to do with Tisha B'Av?
No, I'm only saying because it's in one big package of this whole life system. It's concerned with the life system.
There was a conference I heard of top physicists, and there was a guy who wanted to field a new idea there. He presented his ideas, and the unanimous conclusion there was that it isn't crazy enough. Can
Isn't
be
crazy
right.
enough. Okay, that's
Can
good.
be right.
That's good to see, but it's,
Well, they didn't hear Feynman's physics.
it's slow in coming. Yeah, Feynman, he's the biggest
Feynman's
guy.
physics is crazy.
That's right.
He did his physics on beer coasters from strip joints, by the way.
Yeah.
They
right,
found
right.
his
Oh,
most
sure,
of his
sure.
equations on.
No, Feynman
They
is one of
found
the
his
few.
That's
He
the
wrote a
truth.
book called The Character of Physical Law,
That's
and Feynman is one
strip
of the
joint
few
is the
that I
ether for the
use
creativity.
in philosophy
Apparently
of
for
science.
Feynman. He was a very
Feynman was
good
one of the few
violinist,
that I
too.
use in philosophy of science. You didn't have the philosophy of science, but in philosophy of science, Feynman was the one that I used. Much better than Einstein and Born and Planck and so on. I just looked through some of the material that I threw away because I used to have Xerox. When I did all that research, I had a lot of Xerox copies of all the stuff that wasn't published or hard to get, But I figured, look, I'm not really going to do anything with it, with the mathematics and so forth. I wish I knew mathematics. If I knew mathematics,
Einstein wasn't so good in mathematics
well,
also. He had somebody do it
that's
for
okay.
him.
That's okay, but I don't have anybody do it. And I don't know if we're up to it yet.
He visioned things. He wasn't
know,
a word man. Einstein was somebody with a vision.
Yeah,
right?
okay, but I'm
So
only saying.
visually, it didn't.
But this
fit.
throws a new light on the whole thing of Tisha B'Av and Bayit Shlishi and what the whole thing is talking about. When I was a young guy
If
in
you
the
don't do it, it's
shul,
still intellectual, Joe. It's
okay,
still remains intellectual.
that's true, okay.
I want to hear what you have to say about Tisha B'Av.
Nothing
This
really.
is well, somehow it's
done. Sometimes something is done,
Yeah.
finished, done. Maybe it still has significance in terms
No,
of.
you're right, it has
it's
to be
still
let
stuck
go.
in it,
We
but
have to let
It
go.
can also be, like he says, simply done. The tikkun is done, finished, move on.
Yeah, I
I
agree
mean,
with
for
you.
me personally, that's the situation.
Yeah,
the
I
trouble
agree with
is
you.
that doesn't cook any rice because Am Yisrael, in my opinion, is not about personal tikkun at all. It's about Atem Tiyu Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy
Goy
Kadosh. Am
Kadosh,
Yisrael is
right.
about the community. At least Torah is about community. It's not
Right.
about personal tikkun. You want personal
Right.
tikkun, take a course in Kundalini Yoga.
Yeah,
Am
right.
Yisrael is about Israel is about Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. The Torah says so. I say so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so what difference does it make if I find my? I'm asking him, why doesn't he do it? If you feel that you inside this, no long, in other words, you understand this, what's the problem to implement it on the personal level? And Am Yisrael gets a feedback loop from that. I mean, you don't have to
It's not
concern.
a point. It's not a point.
It's just very. I'm asking a really trivial question. I'm not
point.
saying should be or would be or could be. It has to be.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's strange because if you understand that,
You're
then do
right,
it.
you're
Finish.
right,
Be
you're right.
be what it is. Be the Torah. It's not. I mean, that's for me.
Well, I wrote it. Now the question is to do something about it.
I mean,
That's there. But anyway, this is the
a
basic
little
thing.
bit of azut in that
This
question.
is the basic thing. The basic thing, you know, I mean, it's a staggering thing. Staggering thing. And it's so out of the Western tradition, you know, it's the blind leading the blind.
The Western tradition is predominantly Christian.
Of course. Of course. I even saw it on the program when the guy's talking about the woman, you know, the nursing. So he used the word flesh. It's Christian world. It's a Western civilization. It's a Christian world. So he used the language. He would go crazy if I wrote a letter to the guy who made the program and tell him, you know, it doesn't mean flesh. It means shape. The guy would go crazy. But look how it's dominated. It's dominated the Western civilization. That's the message they get out of the story. And in Greece, so what did they do? Like I said last week, they said, yeah, man is a rational animal. The species is animal. Okay? But with reason and with this and with this and with this. Which means that there are things in the animal and the human being that are the same. They ain't the same, period. That's the level of abstraction that you put on. So when you look at the function of the mammary gland and so on and so on and so on, you look at the thing, oh yeah, well, up to a certain point, genetic code and then all kinds of things. But in the last analysis, change our level of abstraction. Make the vector go further into the concrete instead of up into the clouds. In Western civilization, we're always going up into metaphysics. And metaphysics is the biggest block to Torah. That's what took me 45 years to learn, being in philosophy.
The biggest what?
It took me 45 years to learn that
Biggest
philosophy is the
Block.
biggest block to Torah.
Block.
Because Torah is in this scientific orientation, and one of the reasons I went into philosophy was because it dealt with the God problem. And it took 40. Now a lot of it, you know, is language. I didn't know if I knew Hebrew, if I hadn't been thrown out of the yeshiva by not knowing both languages. So your life would have been totally different. Who knows what I'd be. But
But at least
point
the
is-
philosophers will still
but-
understand you,
but-
Joe. Only the rabbis don't. In my case, both the rabbis and the philosophers don't
But
understand
the
me.
philosophers don't understand it either, because don't read me, read Heidegger. Heidegger dissolved the problem, and that's the end. The way I read it, the topic was being. That's been the term for 2,500 years. So upon an analysis of being that Heidegger makes, being degenerated into becoming, and becoming is not a subject for metaphysics. End of story. Becoming is things that become, that exist. And that's the end of the story. So he wrote a book called The End of Philosophy, because Einochinami, that's the end. I
That's the
was
beginning of
for it.
Am Yisrael.
Right, exactly. That I was so mechavan. Why did he talk to me? Why did he talk to me so soon? Because I was on the way. I met him halfway. Why did he talk to me? Like I say about students with me, people who are listening, they have to be halfway, like an asymptotic curve. They have to be on the way in their mentality, in their questions, and they have to be on there in their feelings, sensitivities. They have to be on the way. Then they could meet. Then I can communicate and learn from them and so on and so on. But they're not on the way. So, incidentally, in the analysis, I didn't spell it out over here, it's not just the client, to use the healing language, it's the Kohen as well. like in Barbara's point about when you're dealing with healing and so forth, there's a kind of a unification, a synergy between the healer and the client, and that's involved, and it's the same thing in the Kohen. It's not just a very static kind of a picture, mechanical.
But they don't become one flesh.
No, I mean it's two.
Shape.
But they have. Like she has a whole big section which triggered off a lot about forgetting, and it's been a great 4 weeks because she triggers. I have to
You spent
stop.
the last 4 weeks on Barbara and Brennan.
Yeah, well, I'm reading. I finished the first book. I read it again, and now I'm reading the second one. Yeah, I'm reading the second one, but I'm stopping for these writing things that come into that stream of consciousness. So Yosef came in streaming, Abraham, and this one and that one. Things just, whatever came to my mind, I stopped. I don't know why. I stopped, and I started to write, to press the buttons there. And sure enough, there was a piece on Yosef and a piece on Esav and Yaakov meeting Esav and what was this all about and so on.
That's all. It's all in chakras.
Sure.
Yosef is in the Yesod.
Sure. Look, you're the guy. You're guilty for this, not me. You're the one who opened me up to all of this. My teacher. See, that's it. It says, by your students you'll be taught. Right?
You need more women in this one.
I agree with you. What can we do?
As you get lost.
Anyway, it's all you. You're the one who suggested I reread Barbara Brennan now. You forgot? You told me that? When you came up to fix it. You said reread her now. That's what you said. Reread her now. So I read it. Great. And it's all there. It's right on the line. It's so, the Pedersen book. How could you... I don't see how anybody could bypass it. 1926. The Olivets, 1812. The restoration of biblical Hebrew based on hieroglyphics. Okay, that's me. I say, how can you bypass it? We've been working on translations and grammar and understanding of the language, which is exclusively Greek, built on Ibn Ezra and the grammarians and so forth, and we are in the process. They don't even consider it. Like I always say, when you have one, then you can't bounce one off the other. If you have two, you can bounce one off the other. So intellection requires two. So before non-Euclidean geometry came in, if you read philosophy of mathematics, and geometry meant Euclid, you'd see the topics and the questions and how they wrote and so on and so on. After 1830, in Lobachevsky and Riemann and non-Euclidean geometry, the philosophy of mathematics changed because you could now bounce off Euclidean geometry with respect to what is an axiom. Oh, now we can compare two geometric systems. And when you have two, you can bounce one off the other. And so that's also involved in the Basar Echad. There's so many things that are different assumptions. It's not starting. And you educated me with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You didn't want to look at the footnotes. I did all the footnotes, You said you didn't want to do all the footnotes, but I did. I read it 3 times. And I left it on the machine for another reading. But anyway, it's a fantastic sefer. It was an eye-opener. And in this crazy day and age, with the information explosion, it's all there, but without the proper teachers, you go around in circles.